everyone, welcome to our weekly show, The Subcontinent. We are here to bring light to some of the most important issues affecting the region. Along with an in-depth analysis of the topics and perspectives from regional and international experts, we shall review what key players think and what the common people have to say.
In this edition of The Subcontinent, we shall review how media and conglomerates create and exploit the colour-based insecurities left by the British colonial rule in India. And we shall also look into how Bhutan measures the happiness of its people and whether this can be a model for other countries to follow suit.
Skin color discrimination in the subcontinent predates the arrival of Muslim rulers, with instances of color prejudice seen in Hindu religious scriptures and caste dynamics. However, this widened with the arrival of British colonizers to the region as they ruled with white superiority complex for almost 200 years. The colonial masters employed a number of divisive tools under which they exploited all religion, class, race and caste-based differences to make sure that the Indians remained divided and do not fight back as they did during the First War of Independence in 1857. So what was the result? A colonial legacy which still tells the people of the subcontinent that white color is a sign of beauty, privilege and power, while dark skin is a sign of ugliness, poverty and lower caste.
India's obsession with fair skin is well known and deep-rooted as colour prejudice is widespread and practiced openly across the country. In other words, the Indian society believes skin colour determines a person's worth, as for many, virtues are associated with fair, while anything dark has negative connotations.
Which one of these do you find the most attractive?
TV programs, movies, billboards, advertisements, they all reinforce the idea that fair is beautiful. Did the prejudice against dark skin in India start due to the British, or was it there even before? India has a complex history, and like any other black group on earth, the variations in skin tones come from mixing, and the various cultures have been a major centre of racial turmoil. Undoubtedly, there were colour preferences in the antiquity, as archaeologists have found remains suggesting ancient Indians used to apply herbals on their faces and bodies to turn them white or whitish. That continued during the medieval period as established by historical sources. However, in the colonial era, when scientific racism was reaching its height, the oppression and persecution of coloured Indians by the white British ignited the class colour hierarchy. This was achieved through the politicisation of identity based on race, caste and religion in any way which would facilitate British authority. Dogs and Indians not allowed. This is what the signboards of many clubs and restaurants in India used to read during the British rule. The reason, of course, was to restrict the natives from entering the premises. The locals were also often referred to as niggers, an ethnic slur typically directed at black people. In fact, the British approached India with arrogance. Their egotism was based on colour superiority. The white rule created an unwillingness to be associated with dark skin, as the colonial rule reinforced fairness as symbol of beauty, power and superiority.
For a region where people are naturally brown or have wheatish skin complexion, fair skin as the standard of beauty is a bit absurd. Thanks to the colonial legacy, India is now one of the fastest growing skin fairness markets with more than $450 million annual spending. The entertainment industry and corporations are also culprits, as they constantly recreate, reinforce and exploit these color insecurities in people for their own gains. These products are not just damaging for the new generation psychologically, but physically as well.
Almost 200 years of British rule, colour prejudice was one of the tools the colonial master used to pursue its divide and rule policy to make sure that the people, whether Hindus or Muslims, don't unite. Under the same milieu, the fair-skinned Indians were given preferential treatment. The legacy continues, with the people of the subcontinent living with the same mindset, idealizing dominant Western culture. Today, India employs a robust fairness cream industry with more than 40 brands competing to produce fairness products. The industry, currently standing at more than $450 million market value, is growing at an exponential rate, often far outracing Coca-Cola and tea industry. Some blame it on the color-class dynamics existing in parts of Hinduism, as some religious scriptures associate dark with lower caste. A 2014 marketing study found that almost 90% of Indian girls cite skin lightening as a high need, and an analysis of nearly 1.6 million profiles on India's largest matrimonial site showed that only 2% Indians perceive themselves as dark.
Every Indian girl is taught, like, be fair, otherwise you won't get married. They want to be beautiful, and that is why this industry is like thriving these days, because we feel that we are not beautiful because we are not that. Like, here is the standard of fair, so we have to reach here somehow. Even actually, when you go to a cosmetic store, if you'll ask for a foundation, so the person will show you one shade lighter.
It seems the role of media and Bollywood is significant in reinforcing the notion of fair is beautiful, a Western consumerist narrative. When children grow up playing with blonde Barbie dolls, watching cartoons where protagonists such as Snow White, Cinderella and Rapunzel, these contribute to their development of the idea of beauty. Today, whether a job vacancy or matrimonial, skin color plays a major role. This fairness obsession is problematic, as it not only encourages racism but creates an identity crisis within all individuals. However, this colonial legacy goes on across the subcontinent, India in particular, despite the social and economic implications of such a mindset.
Regional and international media have been quite skeptical of color racism in this region. Let's see what their angle is.
India's media and advertisement industries are still promoting the idea that women with dark complexions should aspire to be fairer. Finally came the age of British colonial rule. This brings forward the first accounts of discrimination based on colour. In India's Bollywood film industry, the starring roles tend to go to lighter-skinned actors, many of whom endorse products promoting fairer skin. You look like a South Indian, but your sister looks Indian. That's how some comment on complexion of the people of the same country.
Now, to add some insight into our discussion, we have Mr. Aqib Khaliq with us, who is a commentator and a professor of legal systems at Denning Law School, joining us from Karachi. Welcome, Mr. Khaliq. Do you think that the prejudice against the dark skin in India started with the British rule, or was it there even before?
Okay, so I mean, there were some indications that there will be a division on the basis of either skin, ethnicity, caste or religion before the British came into India, because of the very fact that the basic religion or the majority religion in India is Hinduism, which has a caste system in place that essentially calls for people to be divided on the basis of something that they cannot choose. So what the British essentially did was to exploit this loophole in their favor. What they did was to create a divide and rule policy in order for their rule to flourish. So I think that's how it basically took stem. And moreover, whenever there is an invasion or a foreign occupation of any land, the local population is bound to view the invaders or the occupiers as superiors to their own selves. So that's what happened. I mean, the British were white and the Indians were brown, so they always looked towards them as their superiors.
All right, that was quite insightful. Before moving on, we want you to look at the social media updates and what people are saying online. So let's go to the social media and then we can come back. right, welcome back, Mr. Akib. So, how much do you think that the Indian policymakers are to be blamed for the continued colonial legacy?
Okay, so the Indian policymakers are to be blamed because they never regulated the beauty products. I mean, all these beauty products are allowed to market themselves on the basis of that they can magically produce fair colors or fair skin tones, and then they can change your skin tones, because that is something very problematic in essence, and it has not been stopped. So I think that is there, and the policymaker have completely failed to even address the issue, let alone resolve it in the longer run. And on the other hand, I mean, the policymakers have also not regulated the media industry or the film industry, because I mean, you see all these all these foreigners being casted all these foreigners being casted in the movies, and main leads being fair women or fair men, and there is no accountability to that. And I think that is why the average Indian feels that they some in some way or the other they have to be fairer than what they actually are. So I think that is something that is to be blamed on the policymakers, because they never addressed it, and they don't even think that it's a problem. Because I mean, at the end of the day, what are you trying to make the Indian people feel? That they're inferior in some way or the other to the Western people, just because they were born in a certain color, or in a certain ethnicity, or in a certain in a certain race. So I think that is something which is demoralizing for the Indian people at large.
Every 5 years, Bhutan calculates its happiness through its own way: gross national happiness. It is different from the World Happiness Report published by the UN every year, and the UN General Assembly in 2011 asked member countries to follow Bhutan's example. Last research conducted by Bhutan showed its people are happier. Then why is the country lacking in top rankings of the World Happiness Report published last year?
There are few places in the world where happiness is the ultimate goal. The tiny Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan, however, measures prosperity by gauging its citizens' happiness levels, not the country's GDP. In other words, the pursuit of happiness there is more important than the pursuit of prosperity. But is it really what it seems? The Happy Planet Index measures what matters: sustainable well-being for all. It tells us how well nations are doing at achieving long, happy, sustainable lives. According to the 2019 Happiness Report, Finland is the happiest country in the world, with Denmark, Norway, Iceland, and the Netherlands holding the next top positions. But such index is not limited to the West alone, as countries deemed impoverished by many can have its own way of happiness, like Bhutan, which has its own holistic approach to measure the happiness and well-being of its population. A survey conducted by the Center for Bhutan Studies and Gross National Happiness in 2015 showed the happiness of the Bhutanese had increased from 0.743 in 2010 to 0.756 in 2015. Moreover, 91.2% of people reported experiencing happiness, while 43.4% of people said that they are deeply happy. Sustainable development, environmental protection, cultural preservation, and good governance are the 4 pillars of gross national happiness, which have been ingrained in Bhutanese society since 1974, when King Jigme Singye Wangchuk created it.
GNH is based on the belief that development must be human-centered, and that its objective must be to create those conditions that will enable the human individual to achieve what is most important to him. And that happens to be happiness.
GNH has revolutionized the way in which this country operates, going far beyond happiness of its people. It has led to Bhutan becoming one of the greenest countries in the world and a global leader in sustainability. It's the only country to have negative carbon emissions. This means that its forests absorb more carbon dioxide each year than its sources of pollution give out. How amazing is that?
Some argue that the Western model is non-inclusive of culturally relative ideas of happiness perceived by different communities around the world. But others argue that Bhutan has a dark past and still an ongoing issue with its non-Buddhist ethnic Nepalis, several thousands of whom have already been forced out of Bhutan since the 1980s. Still, can this be a model for other countries to follow in a region where people are struggling to be happy?
The issue of happiness in this country was so important that the UN General Assembly passed Resolution Happiness Towards a Holistic Approach to Development in 2011, urging member nations to follow the Bhutan example. The resolution said the pursuit of happiness is a fundamental human goal and embodies the spirit of the globally agreed targets known as the Millennium Development Goals. Guided by its GNH philosophy, Bhutan has consistently worked to ensure that the peace, security and well-being of its people always remain at the center of development. Ironically, the United Nations World Happiness Report of 2019 ranked the kingdom at 95th. One might wonder why this is the case. Critics say that the Western model of calculation of happiness is not inclusive of culturally relative ideas of happiness, which would differ by countries, cultures and traditions. The World Happiness Report ranks countries on 6 key variables: income, freedom, trust, healthy life expectancy, social support and generosity, while the calculation of happiness by the Bhutan model places more emphasis on relative psychological well-being and spirituality. Others say that Bhutan's human rights record has been controversial, especially its treatment of non-Buddhist ethnic Nepalese that make up 35% of the population. The kingdom is also accused of expelling a large number of them under various pretexts. Will Bhutan be a model for other countries in South Asia, especially when many countries in the subcontinent are grappling with enormous unhappiness? Is Bhutan right in its claim while denying human rights to minority populations?
Bhutan's happiness has been a point of interest for the global community. Let's see how the world media views this country's scope of happiness.
The discrepancy in the results provided by the World Happiness Report and the GNH survey lies in the criteria and methodology. Yet when the United Nations released a report ranking countries by happiness last year, Bhutan was nowhere near the top. In the late 1980s, Bhutanese elites regarded a growing ethnic Nepali population as a demographic and cultural threat. The General Assembly today called on United Nations member states to undertake steps that give more importance to happiness.
We are now joined by our valued guest, Mr. Sange Khandu. He is a former member of Bhutan's parliament who is currently a visiting researcher at the University of Westminster in London. Thank you, Mr. Khandu, and welcome to the program. What do you think is unique about Bhutan to be called the land of happiness?
Bhutan is unique because of the development philosophy of gross national happiness that it embarked on. And in that, it places the well-being of the citizen at the center, besides everything else. The happiness philosophy focuses on the 4 pillars, and all these 4 pillars, whether it's the environmental conservation, good governance, or whether it's the balanced regional development, all these facilitate and pay attention to gaps within society, and to also facilitate pursuit of happiness in a sustainable manner. I think a lot of the policies are not, unlike a lot of the policies that you encounter of short-term gains, Bhutan's policies have been guided by the idea of longer-term sustainable balance And therefore, you'd see examples of where exploitation of natural resources has been limited to ensure that there's a balance in the ecosystem. You'll also see in terms of education, there's also a focus placed on value and harmony. And so these are some of the examples that I can think of that comes to mind that Bhutan started off very early on to adopt in its development agenda. And therefore, that is what makes Bhutan unique.
So Bhutan has also been called the world's youngest democracy, and this is while seemingly it has not been a happy place for ethnic minorities. What is your take on that?
Bhutan is called one of the youngest democracies because it's been over 11 years that it has turned into a democracy. And we've had the benefit of being a latecomer, therefore we've had a lot of time to learn from lessons from all around the world. As for the issue of ethnic minority, today if you look at Bhutan, the parliament representation, whether it's in terms of the different ethnicity we have in the country, the composition is representative of the population and the policies are inclusive.
The parliamentary representation is of course a good thing, and I'm not denying that. But let's also talk about the Nepali minority in Bhutan who ended up being forced to become refugees. What do you think about them?
This is something from the past, happened some time ago, and this is something that happened at a time when the country was going through changes. So this is the country, like many countries, this is an issue related to information, data, citizenry, and also the need to have consolidated information as to allow informed planning and decision making. And so it began with a census, which was required because this is we are in a region where there's a very populous countries in the region, and as a resource-strapped country, we needed to also ensure that considering what was happening in the regions, in the countries and states around in the region, we needed to make sure that our sovereignty was protected, and therefore it began with a census. There were people who were not able to produce these documents, and as a result, the approach was not to expel them, but the idea was to identify who were citizens and who were not. And this was the process that led to whatever events that occurred later on. So you'd see that this was not really an ethnic targeted issue as it made out by some people, but really something that a country needed to do as it started on a modernization process. But if you come back to present Bhutan, you'll also see that these things are all in the past, and today you'd see a democratic Bhutan where we have embraced universal values of democracy.
With this, we sign off our program. You can follow us on our social media platforms to stay updated, and we will meet the same time, same day next week. Thanks for watching.